So my name is Molly, and I'm going to be doing my speech on my hearing loss and how I have kind of overcome the obstacles placed in my path over the past 21 years of my life. So I was diagnosed hard of hearing when I was born at Chandler Regional, May 8th, 1997, and I got my first pair of hearing aids when I was 13 months old. They did a lot of testing when I was younger, just to see where my hearing was at, whether or not it progressed, the hearing loss. Progressed at all, meaning that I could have ever possibly been completely deaf, but it didn't, so that was kind of good news. But I have been hard of hearing my entire life. It's just kind of been something I've lived with. But so like I said, I got my first pair of hearing aids when I was 13 months old, so my parents were teaching me sign language over speaking most of the time. So sign language was my first language, and then I started to learn English about the same time alongside of it, but it was a bit harder since I didn't hear words as well. Once I got my hearing aids, they started to speak to me full-time, just in English. We didn't really use too much sign language, unless it was words I couldn't really say yet because I was still only about a year old. After that, after the past couple of years of my life, when I was about 3 years old, they started looking at preschools for me, and I actually started preschool when I was about 3 years old, and I actually started at it was more of a daycare. Started at a daycare that was specifically designated for children with disabilities. So I made a lot of friends with some boys and girls that, had Down syndrome, autism, some that were even completely deaf. So it was kind of nice to open up that world. It was a little bit of a different introduction to interacting with kids than I think most people experience, but it definitely had a positive impact. And then after that, my parents wanted to get me into a really good preschool, one that was really well known, more of a higher level fancy preschool. So they originally wanted me to go to about 3 different more prestigious preschools or elementary schools, and all of them denied me because I didn't want to deal with the hearing loss. So I ended up going to another preschool, but it was great. It was Jordan Elementary, and they actually worked really well with my hearing loss and started to give me speech therapy, which was really helpful. I did have a pretty big speech impediment, so I would slur my words a lot. So between the ages of 4 to about 10, I worked about a half hour to 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, with a speech therapist, saying words like pencil or airplane, really having to emphasize certain words that I would slur or get mixed up. C's and S's were a big problem for me. But after I was about 10 years old, I realized that I didn't really have the speech impediment anymore, so I didn't have to attend speech therapy, which was a big round of applause for me. I really hated it, but I am really thankful that I had all of that help all those years. So after the speech therapy ended, I actually switched to another charter school, and this charter school didn't really have a whole lot of help for kids with disabilities, specifically an IEP, which is an independent education plan. It's what a lot of kids with hearing loss or any disability have in order to make sure that they get the help that they need if they struggle in certain areas. So for example, if we were watching a video in class and it didn't have subtitles, there was normally a way for me to get out of that assignment by doing another, since I normally wouldn't be able to understand it, or all of it in its entirety. But this school didn't really have that, so that was a bit of a challenge for me. So for 2 years, I really kind of struggled to fit in, even though I could hear fairly well and I didn't have a speech impediment anymore. There was just certain assignments, and it was a more rigorous school, and they didn't really change anything in order to help me, so I was at a pretty big disadvantage. But I ended up switching schools, and I went to Anderson Junior High for 8th grade, and they helped me a lot and kind of gained a bit more confidence. I didn't feel like I necessarily had to strive to be so much better in order to be considered equal. So it was a really nice change, and I really liked that. And then I went to high school, and by then my hearing aids basically got cut down in sizing by a full, like, 3/4. So it used to be that my hearing aid case would basically cover my ear, and I normally wore like pretty bold colors, so they were either pink or purple. Either way, they were pretty noticeable, and I would have these clear molds that would have glitter, and they would cover like the entire inside of my ear. So it definitely stood out, but by the time I got to high school, I was wearing these tiny ones that you can't even see now, but if I take them out, you can kind of see what they look like. So they blend in. They give a little feedback, but definitely something I can get used to. So high school was very easy to blend in, and by junior year, one of my best friends, Arthi, she actually was surprised I took out my hearing aids during math class because the batteries had died, and so I had to change out the batteries really quick so I didn't miss a lesson. And I remember just changing them super quick. I was super focused on my hearing aids. I put them back in my ears, and I look over at my best friend Arthi, who had been my best friend for, I don't know, 6-7 years, and she just looked flabbergasted, and she was like, I completely forgot you were hard of hearing. And I was like, what? She's like, you don't have to ask for a question to be repeated. You can't really see my hearing aids anymore. So she was just laughing. We were cracking up in the back of the room in math class. But it kind of showed how long I had come from somebody who was in a school specifically for kids with disabilities, all the way to in high school where people didn't even know I was hard of hearing unless they saw my hearing aids directly. So it's kind of interesting how somebody can overcome all the obstacles placed in their path, and how some people who don't even want to deal with it don't necessarily realize how it's not a big deal if you just have a little bit of assistance. So it was it's nice to look back on those things that were placed in my path and know that I overcame them. And yeah, and so now I'm in college and I'm doing well, and nobody ever knows I'm hard of hearing, so it's kind of cool. But yeah, so that was kind of my overcoming story. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for listening.